Thank you. Mr. Hart, so last time we were here, we had a discussion about 2 degrees and Westpac's commitment to 2 degrees with respect to climate change and also with respect to coal mining. And since that time, Westpac's issued a comprehensive climate statement. And I'm just wondering, I want to draw your attention in particular to that part of it that deals with the energy system and that includes coal mining and sets out the new rules that Westpac's going to apply for future lending. Could you just please perhaps start with a bit of background and give the committee a bit of an explanation as to your thinking behind coming up with that decision and those new set of rules?
Sure. So the climate change policy that we launched in late April or early May was something we've been working on for about 18 months prior to the announcement. We regularly update our climate statement every 3 years. One of the main issues that we've been grappling with, and I think the community at large has been considering, is how do we move toward a 2-degree economy, by which we mean moving to zero net emissions by 2050. And while in our mind, we're very conscious of our responsibility in supporting economic growth in the economy as well, that there is a reality of life at the moment, that there's a need for baseload power to support the economy and keep costs down for businesses. But we need to start that transition. And so the question we asked ourselves was how best to make positive steps toward the transition so that we put ourselves on a path toward 2 degree without knee-jerking too far one way or the other. And the conclusion that we came to was that we would limit the finance of coal mining to the highest quality of coal, where the calorific value of the coal being produced was in the top 15%. And that similarly, we would not support the development of new coal basins, but we would, subject to the quality of the coal being okay, support expansion in existing basins. Recognizing that, and behind that thinking was that if you're going to move to transition, given the long life that a new basin would have, we weren't convinced that that would be either economically or environmentally sustainable, but it gave us some ability to support the current position while we moved to shift toward renewables. We also announced at the same time a commitment to further increase our investment in renewable energy sources dramatically over the next few years. So that was our attempt, recognizing it's a complex issue that we need to support the existing economy and we need to take steps to shift to a more renewable future to try to strike that balance and take a constructive and thoughtful step in that direction.
Thanks, and I appreciate that that statement. And obviously, a lot of this came in the context of, amongst other contexts, but there was a public debate going on about the Adani Carmichael coal mine, and I understand that you've been at pains to say publicly, and also the community, that you're not going to comment on individual customers and what decisions you might make about individual customers. But it's relevant in the context of in that you've made a decision that's drawing a line in the sand with respect to new coal mines, even where they might be with existing customers. So this, as I understand it, so this will affect the decisions that you make in the future about what projects you might or might not support. So I just want to better understand those rules and how you're going to apply this, particularly in the context where the policy says that you're including within this thermal coal sector not just mines but terminals, coal handling terminals themselves, you say. If, in a general sense, if a coal handling terminal is going to exist predominantly to support the creation of a new coal mine that you otherwise wouldn't fund, will you then fund or will you then support that coal handling terminal?
So the general approach is as you described, which is that we are focused on existing basins and existing resources that meet the highest quality of coal, and that we include in our thinking around that the infrastructure related to that. So without commenting on any particular situation, if in the end you had a piece of infrastructure that only related to financing of a new basin, then that would most likely not meet our criteria.
So effectively the same, if someone came to you and said, we want you to help us support a new coal basin, you'd apply a certain set of rules, the rules that you've set out here. And if someone came to you and said, well, look, we've got an existing terminal, but we want you to help finance or refinance it so that a new coal basin, so that we can go and construct a new coal basin and make it viable, then you'll apply the same set of rules to that terminal as you'd apply to the coal basin.
I suppose it would depend on the situation, but the general principle of what you're describing is correct.
Yeah. With respect to, a couple of other banks have said to us that they're now starting to look at, in a bit more fine-grained detail, about how about how climate risks might affect lending practices in the household sector, in particular whether or not properties that are on the coast or in low-lying areas might now be potentially worth less because they're subject to flooding from sea level rises or riverine flooding. And that in the future that might mean they require a higher or a lower LVR, or that it might mean in fact they don't lend at all. Has Westpac started looking at that?
It's certainly been a topic that we've begun to consider. It's, as you can imagine, it's a kind of easy thing to talk about at a high level. When you start getting into the specific situations, it gets a lot more complex. But it's definitely an issue that's on our radar.
We also require that people have insurance for their houses. So at the moment, we're seeing people being able to get insurance. So that will be a first sign if something's moving in the insurance market, that there could be an interplay between insurance and banking.
Have you noticed any changes on that front yet in the insurance market? I mean, do you ultimately see this as an insurance issue rather than a banking issue, or might you be in a position similar to some of the other banks where you say, look, we're not going to write you that mortgage because there's a chance that the value of your house could collapse if sea level rises as predicted?
It's not something that's a major consideration at the moment, but we think about it. We think about it whether it's in the corporate book, the business book, or the consumer book, how we think about climate lending.
Yeah. And can I ask with respect to power, coming back to power generation in particular, I notice that you've set a new target for the profile of your generation portfolio, that you want to get it down to 0.3 tonnes per megawatt hour, and that it's currently at 0.88 compared with a national average within the electricity network of 0.9. What's going to be required for Westpac to do that? How are you going to get down? I mean, that's a substantial drop and a good drop. How are you going to make that happen? Given that that 0.3 might be less than some gas-fired power, for example, that's currently out at the moment.
Well, that's a subject that we're continuing to work on. Our view on these things is we found it effective over time to set aspirational goals for ourselves and then try to work back to figure out how to do it. And in that example, that's something that we continue to talk about with our providers and with our the broad range of suppliers that we have, and with our customers that are involved in the sector, and we're continuing to look for places where we can be innovative in this.
Does that, but it's obviously a goal though that you've set informed by a fair amount of research. I mean, it's not a goal that one would come to lightly, and it requires a significant change. Does that, have you got a sense of what that, in terms of proportion of your exposure to power generation, is it going to mean might mean you end up having to fund 70% renewables and 20% gas and no coal, or 10% coal, or what is it?
You look at this, use and then demand. The big uses of power in the company are property and lights, and then the data centres. So how you improve your use of electricity will play a big part of it, and then where we get it from, we'll look at the best ways in the mix to do that. We haven't set a percentage target for exactly where you get it from, but you've got to work both ends.
Okay. Have we got
Suggestions are welcome, though.
Okay. Thanks. Thanks very much, and I think I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Bandt.